build our identity.
And don't worry, this isn't about turning your life into some rigid, joyless schedule. It's more about bringing awareness, mindfulness to how you're living your life day to day.
It's about understanding the deeper impact of those everyday choices.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we're turning to one of the most famous Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, and his personal writings, the Meditations.
And I think it's important to remember as we go through this that the Meditations wasn't meant to be some big philosophical treatise. It was actually his personal journal.
Oh, really? So, like a Roman emperor's diary?
Pretty much, yeah. It was a place where he wrestled with all those pressures and challenges of daily life.
Trying to figure out how to live a good life, even with all that chaos going on around him.
Exactly. You could say it was his own deep dive into living a virtuous and meaningful life amidst, well, all the craziness.
So think of this as your invitation to do the same thing. Listen along and think about how all those little routines, those often unconscious actions, are actually molding you into the person you are. That's the mission today. Okay, so let's jump into this. How does Stoicism even start to connect with, our everyday habits and who we become?
Well, I think a good place to start is with one of the core ideas in Stoicism, this idea of living according to nature.
According to nature. So, are we supposed to ditch our phones and go live in the woods?
No, not quite. What the Stoics meant was aligning ourselves with two really fundamental parts of our nature. First, our capacity for reason.
Okay, so using our brains, making smart choices. Got it.
Right. And second, this really beautiful idea that we're all interconnected as human beings.
So it's not just about me, me, and me. It's about recognizing how we're all part of something bigger.
Yes, exactly. We're all part of this web of relationships and shared humanity.
Okay, so how do these big ideas, reason and interconnectedness, actually play out in our daily lives? I don't see Marcus Aurelius leaving a checklist for the perfect morning routine.
True, he didn't. But think about all those tiny little choices you make throughout your day, every single day.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, let's say you choose to act with integrity, even when it's really inconvenient. Or you're fair to someone, even when it might cost you something.
Ah, I see. So in those moments, I'm actually exercising my reason, my ability to choose the right thing.
Yes. You're consciously aligning yourself with virtue, and over time, that shapes who you are. And to speak to that interconnectedness, that sense of shared humanity, Marcus Aurelius offers this powerful image in the Meditations. He says, "For we are all born to be fellow workers, as the feet, the hands, and the eyelids."
Wow, that's such a vivid way to put it. All these different parts working together towards a common goal. So when I choose to help a coworker who's struggling, or I listen patiently to someone, even when I'm super busy, those aren't just isolated good deeds. They're part of this larger idea of being a fellow worker.
Yeah.
And in a way, they're shaping me into the kind of person who values those connections.
Exactly. Each act of kindness, each choice to put the well-being of others on par with your own, it all contributes to this bigger picture. It's weaving you into the fabric of humanity. You're not just an isolated individual, you're part of something larger. And that shapes your identity.
This reminds me of something we know from psychology, the power of habit. How much our brains, our behaviors are actually shaped by those things we do over and over again. Did the Stoics have a similar understanding of how these daily habits impact who we become?
Absolutely. They didn't have the scientific language that we have today, but the Stoics were incredibly observant. They really understood how human behavior works.
Like they were people watchers.
In a way, yeah. And they knew intuitively that our character isn't something we're just born with. It's something that's constantly being molded and shaped, or unfortunately, sometimes eroded by our daily actions.
So my habit is scrolling through social media first thing in the morning. A Stoic might see that as more than just a mindless way to wake up.
They might see it as a missed opportunity to start the day intentionally, to connect with your own values instead of immediately getting swept up in the external world.
So instead of seeking out validation or distraction, I could be using that time for something more meaningful.
Maybe. Marcus Aurelius himself wrote about how daily his life wasteth and decreaseth, urging us to be really mindful of how we spend our time and energy.
So the Stoic perspective would be to ask myself, is this habit actually helping me become the person I want to be? Is this really how I want to use this precious time?
Precisely. It's a question of alignment. Are your daily habits aligned with your deepest values and aspirations?
That's a great question. And it makes me think about another key part of Stoicism, the practice of self-examination. How did they incorporate that into their daily lives to really understand and shape their identity?
For the Stoics, self-awareness was absolutely crucial. They advocated for regular introspection, especially at the beginning and end of the day.
So like a daily check-in with yourself.
Yes, but it wasn't about beating yourself up for your mistakes. It was more about calmly reflecting on your thoughts, your feelings, your actions throughout the day to gain a clearer picture of what's going on inside.
Trying to understand your inner landscape, as it were.
Exactly. They were particularly interested in becoming aware of what they called impressions, or in Greek, phantasia. These are those initial automatic reactions we have to things.
Like when I get annoyed that the train is delayed, or when I feel a twinge of envy when I see someone else's success.
Exactly. The Stoics believe that by paying attention to those initial responses, we can start to understand our vulnerabilities and the areas where we need to cultivate more virtue.
So it's not about ignoring those feelings or pretending they don't exist.
No, it's about seeing them as valuable data, as feedback. Ask yourself, why am I reacting this way? What does this tell me about my underlying beliefs and values?
So each time I feel that frustration, that anger, that judgment, it's an opportunity to learn something about myself.
Yes, and to make a conscious choice about how you want to respond. Remember, Marcus Aurelius emphasized the importance of examining your thoughts to make sure they are sincere and peaceable.
Okay, that sounds like a lot of internal work, like constantly checking in with myself. But I guess the idea is that the more we do it, the more aware we become of those patterns that are shaping our actions and ultimately our character.
Exactly. By observing our thoughts, we can start to filter out the unhelpful ones, the negative ones, the irrational ones.
Making space for thoughts that are more aligned with reason and virtue.
Right. And over time, this inner work starts to transform our outer behavior. It helps us become more consistent in our actions and therefore more integrated in who we are. Our thoughts, our actions, our character, they all start to move in the same direction.
Now, let's be real. Our daily lives aren't always smooth sailing. We're constantly bumping into difficult people, dealing with frustrating situations, unexpected setbacks, you name it. How did the Stoics advise us to navigate those inevitable daily challenges in a way that actually strengthens our character instead of, letting it tear us down?
The key for the Stoics was recognizing that in any situation, no matter how difficult, there's always something you can control, your own response.
So it's not about pretending those external things don't bother you.
No, it's about choosing how you react, about cultivating virtues like justice, courage, temperance, and wisdom, and making those your default mode of operation, especially when you're faced with adversity.
It's funny, I'm remembering that famous quote from Marcus Aurelius where he talks about preparing himself each morning to encounter difficult people.
Ah, yes. He reminds himself to expect to deal with people who are idle, curious, unthankful, arrogant, deceitful, envious, unsociable.
It's kind of amazing how those complaints are still so relatable today, thousands of years later. Some things never change, right?
Human nature is pretty consistent. But the important part of that quote isn't just that he's bracing himself for negativity. It's that he's reminding himself to understand where that negativity comes from.
So he's not just putting up walls, he's trying to cultivate empathy for those difficult people.
Yes, he's recognizing that their behavior often stems from ignorance, from not understanding what truly matters in life. And his key takeaway, which is so relevant for us today, is to focus on your own response.
So instead of meeting their anger with anger or their judgment with judgment, I try to meet them with patience, with understanding, maybe even a bit of compassion.
Precisely. That's where the real work lies. In those daily moments of friction, those little bumps in the road, that's where your character is truly tested.
Like when I get a rude email where I'm stuck on hold with a terrible customer service rep. It's about consciously choosing how I respond in that moment.
Yes. Each time you choose patience over anger, understanding over judgment, you're reinforcing those virtues within yourself. You're making them a more integral part of who you are.
And it strikes me that while we've been talking about these external challenges, there's also a really important internal aspect to this. How do we cultivate inner peace amidst all this daily chaos? How do we create a sense of tranquility that isn't dependent on everything going our way?
The Stoics were very big on this idea of inner refuge. They believed that true freedom and tranquility come from within, not from external circumstances.
So it's not about trying to control everything that happens to us, but about learning to control our own inner state.
Exactly. And they believed that our daily routines could play a crucial role in building that inner resilience by creating intentional space for self-reflection and for connecting with our own values.
So it's about building habits that nourish our inner life, not just our outer achievements.
Yes. Marcus Aurelius reminds us, "At what time soever thou wilt, it is in thy power to retire into thyself and to be at rest and free from all businesses.
So even in the midst of a super busy day, I can still find those moments to reconnect with myself.
Absolutely. Maybe it's a few minutes of mindful breathing. Maybe it's journaling. Maybe it's simply sitting in silence and letting your thoughts settle. These small, consistent practices can make a huge difference.
It's like creating those little anchors of peace throughout the day.
Exactly. They help you step back from the external noise and reconnect with your inner center. And that sense of calm, that inner strength, it starts to radiate outward. It shapes your whole way of being in the world.
Now, there's one more Stoic principle I want to touch on because it's often misunderstood. This idea of the indifference of externals. Can you explain what that means and how it relates to our daily lives? Because honestly, it seems kind of counterintuitive. I mean, don't we all want things like good health and financial security?
You're right, it can seem counterintuitive, but the Stoics weren't saying we should be completely detached from those things. It's not about denying our natural desires. What they were saying was that our true well-being, our happiness, and most importantly, our virtue shouldn't be dependent on those external things.
Because those things are ultimately outside our control, right?
Exactly. We can't always control our health, our wealth, our reputation, no matter how hard we try. But we can control our own thoughts, our judgments, our actions. And that's where the real power lies.
So this idea of indifference isn't about apathy or suppressing our emotions. It's about recognizing that our true freedom comes from focusing on what we can control.
Precisely. Marcus Aurelius put it this way: the things themselves that affect us, they stand without doors. Meaning it's our internal judgments about those external things that truly impact us.
Ah, I see. So it's not about pretending those external things don't matter. It's about choosing how we respond to them and about recognizing that our true worth isn't defined by those things.
Exactly. And that's why our daily routines are so important. By consciously directing our energy towards how we act, how we treat others, how we approach our work, we're reinforcing that sense of agency. We're building an identity that's grounded in our character, not in the unpredictable nature of external circumstances.
It's a way of taking back control, even when it feels like life is throwing us curveballs.
Yes. And finally, I think it's important to remember that we're not in this alone. The Stoics believed strongly in the power of learning from others, from those who embody the virtues we aspire to.
So it's about paying attention to the role models in our lives, seeing how they navigate their own daily routines.
Exactly. It's about finding those people whose character you admire and observing how they conduct themselves. Not to blindly copy them, but to gain insights and inspiration for your own growth.
Like having real-world examples of how to live out those virtues instead of just reading about them in a book.
Right. As Marcus Aurelius suggests, when thou wilt comfort and cheer thyself, call to mind the several gifts and virtues of them whom thou dost daily converse with. By paying attention to the positive qualities we see in others, their resilience, their kindness, their integrity, we can start to cultivate those same qualities in ourselves. And that shapes our identity in a really powerful way.
This has been such a fascinating exploration. It's really made me think about my own daily routines in a new light. They're not just about getting things done. They're about becoming the person I want to be.
Exactly. And I hope our listeners will take that away from this deep dive, that your daily routines are a powerful force for shaping your identity.
They're like the tiny brushstrokes that create the larger work of art over time.
Yes. And by making conscious choices in those daily moments, by aligning your actions with reason and virtue, by cultivating self-awareness, and by focusing on what you can control, you're actively participating in that creation. You're shaping yourself into a more resilient, virtuous, and meaningful person.
So as a final thought for our listeners, I'd like to leave you with this. Think about just one small routine in your day. Maybe it's how you start your morning, or how you approach a particular task at work, or how you interact with a specific person. How could you bring more Stoic awareness, more intention to that routine? What aspect of your character could you strengthen through that small shift? And for further inspiration, we encourage you to check out Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. It's a treasure trove of wisdom on this timeless topic. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
It's been a pleasure.